I've been playing a lot of Dead Rising recently, and it made me wonder, why hasn't this game series come back? For those that don't know, Dead Rising 4 is an utter piece of garbage, and it was the death of Dead Rising. But it doesn't mean the series has to die because of one game that was okay and then one game that was bad. Dead Rising 1 and 2 have had a special place in my heart, and every once in a while I like to replay both of those games, and they are still good even to this very day. It really confuses me why Capcom hasn't remade either the first or the second one, especially with the abundance of remakes that they're making right now with the Resident Evil franchise. Now, don't get me wrong, doesn't mean that I don't want any Resident Evil remakes. Every single one of them, except for maybe a third, has been fairly decent, but this is the one franchise that they refuse to even acknowledge even exists anymore. So today I want to talk about the downfall of Dead Rising and the downfall of Capcom Vancouver.
I've covered wars, you know.
So for those that do not know, Capcom Vancouver, formerly known as Blue Castle Games, is the minds behind Dead Rising 2, 3, and 4. And they weren't allowed to make any other games. They actually came up to Capcom with several game ideas and each one of them got shot down. One of those games is very reminiscent of Dead Space, and another one kind of like Destiny. But here's the thing, right? Microsoft really wanted something to take on The Last of Us. And wouldn't you know, they have a zombie IP, so that's when they approached Vancouver with the idea of trying to make something new and original that would beat out The Last of Us. But the problem is, even though Capcom Japan owns Vancouver, they never really talked to one another, which led to 6 months of development for a new IP with a Dead Rising name. This project name was called Climber, and it was going to be a true open world experience, where it was going to be heavily focused on stealth killing, rather than the over-the-top killing a lot of zombies that Dead Rising is normally known for. So after 6 months of making this game codenamed Climber, they finally presented to Capcom Japan, and they definitely didn't like it, which is a little bit disappointing because it is a good idea, just not what Dead Rising is all about. This unfortunately was the beginning of the end for Capcom Vancouver and for Dead Rising in general. The reason why, because after this event, they definitely laid off 40% of the original staff, which meant that they had very little people for the next Dead Rising. And it definitely sounds like it was retaliation for trying to make something new and not telling Capcom about it. And if it wasn't bad enough, none of the stuff that they created for codename Climber they could reuse. So not only has it been 6 months down the drain, a lot of the funds that were used to make the next Dead Rising game are unfortunately lost. And with Capcom and Microsoft unable to help Vancouver, it meant whatever they had is whatever they had. And when you're consistently making only one game, I can totally understand trying to make other games. They were trying to be reasonable too, and they were getting desperate to a point where they were trying to bring back old Capcom properties just so they can make something new and original. Unfortunately though, the safest bet was to go back to not only Willamette, but to bring Frank West back as well. But the original writer for 2 and 3 unfortunately left, which is what led to the poor writing in the game in the first place. Several other things that led to the downfall of Dead Rising were leaving out the timer and taking out psychopaths. The reason why the timer was even taken out in the first place because there was so little content, the timer would end up making it more apparent that there was very little content. And the exclusion of the psychopaths was mainly during the time that it was kind of seen as insensitive to people with mental health issues. However, there is a story reason as to why the way they are in the first place, and the characters themselves aren't killers. They don't want to have to do this, they're doing it out of self-defense. As one of the psychopaths, Cliff, is dying on the floor, he shows Frank a picture of his granddaughter and shows remorse, as the only reason he was doing this in the first place is because he was a Vietnam vet and was having flashbacks. It's kind of the one thing that everybody comes back to when they ever talk about Dead Rising, is talking about Cliff, because it's such a memorable moment and it's very sad, and you can see it within Frank's expression as well. But with all things said and done, unfortunately, Capcom Vancouver in 2018 was unfortunately shut down. And with that, the ironic death of Dead Rising is officially come to an end. The sad part is I don't see this series ever coming back. Even though they re-released the first and the second game, I don't really see them ever coming back to this game series, at least for now. We could probably see one in the future, but right now all they ever really focus on is the games that they make in Japan and no other games. But Capcom's gotta be willing to risk it all.
If you're ever really gonna